Okay, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into a look at what might have happened if Kestrel actually succeeded in killing Glory like Marasir wanted her to. Basically, in this AU, the Dragonettes never listened into the conversation that clued them into Kestrel's intentions, so they don't find out about the danger until it's too late. Also, before we dive in, just a reminder to check out my store. There's a link in the description, but I have tons of cool Wings of Fire merch, and that's a great way to support me while getting something cool for yourself as well. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and use the link in the description to take a peek. And without any further ado, let's get on with the what if. If Clay had thought Marasir's visit was a nightmare, he'd been wrong, he thought. Because the next day, Glory was missing. At first, when Sunny barreled into his and Starflight's cave to tell them that she couldn't find Glory anywhere, he hadn't thought much of it. She'd got moody sometimes, and yesterday Marasir had been horrible to her. She'd probably gone somewhere to be angry alone. Glory was pretty good at hiding when she wanted to be. Then, they couldn't find her anywhere. Kestrel was gone too. Tsunami said she hadn't seen her leave, which meant the Skywing must have left sometime during the night. But the real clue was when they confronted Webbs and Dune, and both of them flatly refused to say anything about either missing dragon. After that, Clay knew something was wrong. He didn't know what, but something in his bones felt wrong. And finally, Kestrel returned, without Glory. She stomped into the cave to a storm of questions from the remaining 4 Dragonettes. Moments before it happened, Clay recognized the arch of her neck and the way her mouth curled, and he pushed Sunny and Starflight down as the irate Skywing breathed a jet of fire over their heads. "Leave me alone," she hissed, before stomping toward the Guardian's cave in an uncommonly foul mood. Clay couldn't believe it. Some part of him knew what had happened, but he couldn't actually make himself believe it. Across the cave, Tsunami locked eyes with him in a dazed, shocked kind of way. Maybe Glory got to go home," Sunny said quietly. Clay didn't know if she believed that herself, or if she was just trying to be optimistic. Starflight looked horrified, but disbelieving. He suspected, but didn't really think Kestrel would do it. Clay looked at Tsunami again. They both knew she would. Some days later, things had only gotten worse. Kestrel was sullen and combative, frustrated with the Dragonette's questions. Webbs and Dune were both avoiding her, while still refusing to even mention Glory's name, and pretending not to hear when they asked about her. By now, Clay suspected even Sunny had figured it out. The little sandwing had curled up by Tsunami in the cave and hadn't moved in 2 days. Tsunami, who'd supposedly been meant to have been released by now, had snarled and raged at Kestrel ceaselessly, and promised she'd kill her as soon as she got free. So of course, she wasn't free. Clay wondered how long they would keep her chained up, and what would happen if she ever did get loose. Starflight had sequestered himself in the library, but Clay didn't think he'd actually read anything. He was just lying morosely on the floor and avoiding all the yelling. Clay himself split his time between trying to keep Starflight company and sitting with Tsunami and Sunny in the main cave. He didn't know how to help. He didn't know how to make sense of how quickly their lives went from bad to worse. And then things changed again. Webbs left the cave one day to meet with the Talons of Peace, and he returned with a Skywing. And not just any Skywing, a Dragonette. A replacement. Glory's replacement. Flame, or Mini Kestrel as Starflight had morosely dubbed him, was completely unlikable. He was grumpy and always yelling at everyone and furious about being taken to the caves. Apparently he was part of another set of Dragonettes. A replacement set. Clay felt like everything he thought he knew was being turned upside down. But Flame, from the fake Dragonettes of Destiny, had been living outside in the real world. And now that he was trapped inside for the next 2 years with the real deals, he was supremely displeased about it. Not that anyone else appreciated it either. Tsunami hated him on sight, on principle. She knew he was Glory's replacement, and she resented that. Sunny had at least made some kind of effort to make friends, but Flame had snapped at her and clawed at her after that. Clay had jumped between them and snarled at the Skywing to back off. He went out of his way to mock Starflight whenever possible, which had caused Starflight to abandon the library and join the huddle in the main cave. Clay supposed he was glad the Nightwing was no longer isolating himself, but he wished it hadn't come to this. The Guardians seemed determined to ignore the entire situation. Webbs spent a good deal of time at the bottom of the river these days, and getting anywhere near Kestrel had become an exercise in stupidity. Clay was just glad they were remembering to bring them food these days. He didn't know how the Guardians thought this would all work out. Surely they didn't think that in 2 years they'd release the Dragonets into the world and they'd be a cohesive group with any interest in doing what the Guardians or any of the Talons of Peace said. At this rate, they'd have to replace Tsunami too, because she was still furious with Kestrel. Clay was genuinely worried she would either kill Kestrel or die trying. And as time passed, nothing got better. Clay began to wonder if it ever would. Sometime after Glory's disappearance, the Dragonets of Destiny came to an accord. Well, the Dragonets in Flame came to an accord, actually. He still hated them, but Clay and Starflight had decided that the only thing he probably hated more than them was being trapped in the caves after first experiencing a life outside. And so, one night they had a meeting, and the 5 of them came to an agreement. They would work together to escape, and after that they'd go their separate ways and never have to see each other again. At first, all Tsunami's plans started with killing Kestrel and taking the key to the rock door from Dune afterwards. By her reasoning, between her, Clay, and Flame, they could overpower the Guardians if they surprised them in their sleep. But Sunny hated that plan, and Clay was uncomfortable with it too. He was angry that they'd killed Glory, but he didn't want to be like them. He just wanted to escape and forget all of it. They argued about that for a long time. Flame, for once, had taken Tsunami's side. But in the end, Sunny, Starflight, and Clay managed to convince her to focus her energies elsewhere. Clay discussed the matter with her in hushed tones for several minutes. She was still so angry. But Clay reminded her that nothing would bring back Glory now, and that he and Tsunami still had 2 other friends to look after in the meantime. Finally, she begrudgingly agreed not to make killing Kestrel the centerpiece of her escape plans. But, she said fervently, if something goes wrong and she attacks us, don't expect me to hold back. Okay, Clay shrugged, ignoring Sunny's pinched expression. Personally, he didn't want to kill Kestrel, but he did want to fight her, just a little bit. He didn't know what he might do in the moment if it came down to it. He didn't want to find out. What if that was the monster in him? The monster Kestrel herself had always told him he needed to find. Clay shook his head and forced himself to refocus on the task at hand. The Dragonets talked through some other ideas, waiting until Kestrel was out to steal the key from Dune and Webbs, or trying to break through the skyhole even. But Tsunami had gone suspiciously silent, and eventually Clay looked back at her. You have an idea, he said. You wanted to escape even before all this. You would have been making a plan even back then. She huffed, looking away. At the river. Clay followed her gaze. The river? He asked. Of course she would have thought of that. It had to go somewhere. It has to be me, she said, lashing her tail in agitation. You can't go, Clay. You'll die. The plaintive tone in her voice told him what would happen to them if they lost another of their own. So we need to get you free then, he said, looking down at the chains that had been wrapped around her for so long. She snarled. Good luck, she said. Clay tilted his head. Maybe we could smash the stone? He wondered. That would wake up the Guardians for sure, Starflight said. Just melt the chains, Flame huffed. I don't know why you haven't already. Our fire isn't hot enough, Clay admitted. We tried. Flame rolled his eyes. Figures, he said. What if you tried? Sunny ventured. Maybe your fire is hotter? He squinted at her sourly. Of course it is, he snapped. I'm a Skywing, aren't I? Well then try it, Tsunami snarled. Flame growled back, bristling, and Clay tried to head them off before they could break into yet another argument. Flame, if Tsunami can escape through the river, she can open the door from the outside, he said. Then we could all escape. Flame blew a puff of smoke. Why would she come back? He scoffed. No way. Tsunami growled again. Unlike you, I actually care about someone other than myself, she said hotly. I'll come back for my friends. And against once the door's open, you can do whatever you want. Flame studied them coldly for a long moment, then hunched forward toward the chains. Without warning, he bathed the links in blistering hot fire. Tsunami flinched away with a rattle, and Starflight glanced nervously at the tunnel leading to the Guardian's cave. After what felt like a lifetime, though, Flame managed to melt the chains, and Tsunami was free. Finally, she snarled. Clay couldn't tell if she was happy or angry. She spun and headed for the river. Wait, Clay said, hurrying after her. She didn't slow, and he followed her into the water and grabbed her wingtip. Be careful, he implored. And hurry. I don't want to know what Kestrel will do when she wakes up to find you gone. Tsunami studied him before giving a sharp nod and diving into the waves. Time passed. They waited nervously, unsure whether Tsunami or the Guardians would find them first. But finally, the entrance rock rumbled and rolled aside, letting beautiful gray pre-dawn light stream into their prison. Tsunami appeared in the doorway, looking tired but victorious. This way to leave, don't waste any time, she said, gesturing to the outside. She'd done it. She'd found the door. They could finally escape. I feel like as often as I have sad endings in these, I don't actually usually kill one of the Dragonets of Destiny. I mean, I've done it before, but it just packs such a punch. Anyways, I know this one is short, but I didn't really want to do like a whole plot line for it. I really just wanted to focus more on the emotions and how everyone would react right away to Glory's death. If you enjoyed this What If, feel free to go check out some of my other ones. I have lots focusing on the Dragonets of Destiny and the rest of the cast, so you should totally take a look. Also, don't forget to take a look at the links in the description so you can find my DeviantArt, Patreon, and of course my store. Thank you so much for watching and have a blessed day.